What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with Invincible. Yes, we are. The beginning of the Viltrumite War Part 1. I guess officially the Viltrumite War. The last video was more of a prelude than anything else, but this is how it all starts. Probably the single greatest story arc in the entirety of the Invincible run. So, one of the first things we do here is we basically pick up with Alan the Alien and Nolan, Omni-Man, yes, and they're looking for a guy by the name of Tech Jacket. Now, Tech Jacket is kind of a cool concept here in the Invincible comics, and it's one of the things where Kirkman kind of does this slow build. And that's one of the things I hope you guys are kind of noticing over the course of the Invincible run, that there are a lot of similarities between like DC Comics and Marvel Comics and Invincible, but of course it's on a much smaller scale, right? Now, I will say that I think that what's going on here with regards to the kind of spacefaring escapades insofar as the action you see is a lot bigger than DC, right? And if it's not Green Lantern, you never really see anything about space in DC Comics, but with Marvel, you see stuff in space all the time. Thanks to Dan Abnett in 2006 and Annihilation, it became an even bigger thing after that. Up to that point, it was just small little things here and there. But the cool thing here is that Tech Jacket is basically there with his dad. And it's one of those little situations where you kind of have Omni-Man and you've got Alan, who are just kind of like, I mean, I don't really know exactly where this guy is, but supposedly this is his house. He kind of vanished at some point along the line, but like, I don't know how powerful this guy is. But all we really know is that this is one of the guys that they're recruiting for the Coalition of Worlds, right? Remember, that's their mission that we picked up with in the last video, was basically them traveling from world to world, which included even Earth, and looking for people that could help them fight against the Viltrumites. And that's really all they can do, right? Is just find other people that can help them overcome the Viltrumites and kind of call it a day. You do get this really interesting moment where they're talking to an older guy and they ask him, like, are you looking for the Thompson kid? Because like he's probably in a space station. That's where his family took off to. And they're kind of like, you're not really freaked out by the fact that Alan's got like one eye and like I'm in this weird little getup. And the guy's like, I mean, I've seen Stranger, but usually bad guys don't knock. It's a pretty sound line of logic, to be honest. It works, man. And so of course they end up traveling to this kind of space station where you have Tech Jacket and you have his dad, who both reside. Now, of course, when Alan and Nolan show up, the fact that they're not bashing the place in, smashing it to pieces, obviously illustrates the fact that they're there essentially as good guys. But Tech Jacket is an interesting character, because we'll talk about him in a minute. Instead, what we end up doing here is switching back over to the home of Mark and Debbie and all that kind of stuff. And they're all just really kind of hanging out, right? All just sort of doing their thing and talking and whatnot. But Mark's brother, again, he's still pretty young, but one of the things to remember is he ages at a more rapid pace than people normally do. And that's why he's aging so fast here, right? That's why in the last video that we did, the last couple videos, he was maybe like 8 or 9 years old. And now it looks like he's 15. Because of that, you know, this is where he's just kind of at that youthful age where he's just really trying to figure himself out. For him, it's more difficult. And this is something that's kind of interesting, right? You know, sidetrack this story for a second. Let's talk about real life, right? The real life struggle of a teenager is you are experiencing an existential crisis. That's all it is. Who are you? Where are you going? What are you about? What is the meaning of it all, right? What's your purpose in this world? And in all honesty, sure, it starts in your teenage years. Guys, that never ends. Like, if you guys kind of approach this from the perspective of like, if I don't have myself totally figured out by the time I'm 30, I've somehow failed in life. Well, that's a terrible philosophy. Like, wait until you get to 30 years old. You know what's going to happen if you don't have yourself figured out? The sun is going to rise and the day will go on and everything will be okay. I didn't become a YouTuber until I was 30. So I'm 37 years old now. So God, I've been doing this for like 7 years. Jesus, time flies, man. But it's just one of those things, right? That the nature of what it means to be a teenager is to just kind of panic and to believe that you're supposed to have it all figured out. You're supposed to have the answers to everything. It's a lot of undue pressure society puts on you guys. But at the end of the day, while society starts to put that on you, you guys maintain it on yourself. And that's where you really have to break free of all that. But for Mark's younger brother, the whole thing here is he wants to go and he wants to fight in the Viltrumite War. He wants to go and do that thing. But ultimately, a lot of this frustration comes from the fact that while Mark has talked to his dad since his dad has been on Earth, Nolan has not come to see his other son, right? He hasn't come to see him at all. And that's kind of a big crushing thing, right? Because it's one thing when you're a little kid and you're like, okay, like we got to whisk you away and your brother and your you know, not really your biological mom, but I guess kind of like a estranged mom more or less, is going to take care of you. And then never having heard from your father. And then when he does come back, he talks to your other brother and doesn't talk to you, right? Like that's got to be crushing. It's got to be a crushing experience. But he's not really approaching this from a place of feeling devastated. He's approaching it from a place of feeling like, but why though, right? It's really more confusion than and kind of concern than anything else. Now, if this goes on long enough, then it will turn into sadness and it will turn into anger, because at this point it's kind of like, why wouldn't he want to talk to me? Given enough time, it's God, why doesn't he want to talk to me, man? And then it's like, why won't he talk to me? You know, and then it's just, it turns into rage, right? And that's the last thing this kid needs. But ultimately, Mark's whole stance here is he's worried about coming around here, because at the end of the day, he doesn't know how things are going to unfold. He doesn't know if he's ready to see mom yet, and he doesn't know if he's ready to tell her about all this. And so we might be able to arrange a meeting of sorts, but at the moment, that's why he hasn't come around here. At that moment, Debbie walks in and she's like, what are you guys talking about? Like, what do you not want to tell me about? And who is it that's not ready to see me? And then just words off the side of the screen, me. But I've since changed my mind. Nolan has come back home. Nolan has come to see his wife. And I know you guys knew it was coming. I know you guys knew it was only a matter of time before it was coming. Now, here's the thing. The exchange is incredibly short. This is writing genius of Robert Kirkman, right? You read comic books long enough, one of the things you learn to appreciate is the salvo. This whole concept of like Nolan and Debbie are talking again, but only for a moment, because then what it does is it gives you this desire to like see them converse, right? Because they haven't talked since like Nolan left Earth, since everything popped off. She learned the truth about what was going on when the whole footage and everything was released to social media. Like, she learned about all that stuff, and she hasn't seen or heard from him since. So there's a lot of pent-up anger and a lot of pent-up irritation there. The first thing he does is apologize, and rightfully so. He literally married her under false pretenses, right? He was a guy who was sent to Earth to conquer it. Now, ultimately, he ended up falling in love with her, and everything changed. And that's what he said. He's like, my time here has changed me. All those years I spent with you, raising Mark, our life together, I thought it was an act. I thought I was pretending to be something that I wasn't, but I was wrong. I was changing, becoming the person that you knew. What we shaped together was real. When I fought Mark, I learned the truth. I was forcing myself to carry out my mission. That was an act. That it was the whole thing being turned on its head. That in reality, the person he was pretending to be is the person he became. And that's what's so interesting, right? That's kind of the gift of humanity that Robert Kirkman sort of hits on here, that despite some of the bleak moments that you see in Invincible, that it really kind of hits this idea that from the perspective of somebody like Nolan, humanity has this sort of grandness about it, right? This sort of innocence that the rest of the universe simply just doesn't have. But at the end of the day, while he apologizes and he's like, I've grown to love you, she just interrupts him and stops him and says, I don't think I can ever really believe any of that, Nolan. And how could I possibly believe any of that stuff? And at that moment, he's like, okay, fine, I understand. He says, I'm sorry. And he ultimately leaves. Now, from there, you switch over to Tech Jacket, basically talking to Alan the alien. And the reason why you haven't really seen Tech Jacket is as it's explained, his job is to basically monitor extraterrestrial threats from beyond the stars, right? So that's why you kind of see him at like great big huge events, but you don't really see him in day-to-day stuff. It's pretty smart to just kind of a stroke of the pen, and that's why you don't really see him all that often, but it is kind of a cool thing, right? He's not a traditional superhero, but he is certainly somebody capable of handling like threats beyond the planet Earth, right? So he's definitely somebody the Coalition wants to have on their side. Now at that moment, we switch over to Nolan talking to his son. And now for Oliver, it's a little bit awkward, man. Not gonna lie, it's a little bit strange because he's never really had a conversation like this with his dad because he was so young when he was taken away. It's one of these things where he's never really had a true conversation with his father. The funny thing about this is Nolan kind of approaches it as if it's just kind of another day. I mean, you do kind of get the significance that Nolan hasn't seen his son in a long time, but it's one of these things where it's like, let's just kind of pick up where we left off. And the reality is that Oliver's excited for that. That in a lot of instances, and I've experienced that too, when you had a parent kind of bail, that is one of these things where it's like, but you can't pick up where you left off, right? Like where you left off was years ago, right? Where we are now is completely different. But for Oliver, the desire to understand and to meet with his father is so intense, it doesn't matter to him how long it's been. His father's back now, and his father wants to talk to him, right? And that's kind of the cool thing here is it would have been very easy for Nolan to say, okay, like we'll have time together, son, but for now, I need to go take off and I need to fight this threat. Much like what you saw him doing with Mark pretty consistently. Instead, it's one of these things where parents basically fix mistakes that they made when they had their first kids when it comes to ancillary kids, right? Second kids, third kids, fourth kids, so on and so forth. You know, for Oliver, like his father extends him the invitation and says, you know what, why don't you come with us, right? Why don't you come with us on this trip? And then I can learn to understand you better. And like, that's exactly what Oliver wanted to hear, because what it puts off is my dad wants to spend time with me. From there, you switch over to a pretty tender moment between Adam, Eve, and Mark, right? Because remember, Eve knew this was coming. She knew it was only going to be a matter of time before the Viltrumite War officially kicked off, and Mark had to go. And so when Mark shows up, all he says is, it's time. And that's all that needs to be said, right? So of course, they share the night together, and he's like, I don't know when I'm going to be coming back, or if I'm even going to be coming back. And of course, Eve doesn't want to hear that, but that's the reality of the situation, right? This Viltrumite War that Mark is going to fight in, he may not come back. He may not survive. We've seen how he's faced off against other members of the Viltrumite race, and it didn't go very well, right? Now we're talking about him waging war against the entire empire, right? It's going to be big. It's a massive massive thing. And so in the face of that, while she is really trying to kind of blow it off and saying, no, no, that's never gonna happen, Mark's really kind of holding his ground and really facing reality here and saying, but that's something that you need to accept. The people here that we're gonna be fighting are a lot more powerful than I am. I don't know if I'm powerful enough to defeat these guys. I don't know for sure that I'm going to survive this, but at the end of the day, that's what needs to happen, right? You need to understand that. And so ultimately Eve cuts him off and then just says like, I don't want to focus on that. For right now, I just want to focus on us, right? If you're gonna have to leave soon, then let these moments that we have together be these just amazing moments so that if you end up dying, this is what I can recall our last time together being. The downside of this, of course, is that as Mark starts to fall asleep, Eve starts to bawl because she's facing the fact that she might lose Mark, right? That Mark might die, which is really a testament to how much she loves him, right? Eve adores that guy. She's head over heels for him. And so from there, you basically switch over to Mark and Oliver and Nolan, who are all just kind of hanging out, which is pretty cool to see like the father and son team just kind of working together like, yeah, we're going to fight a race of Superman and we might die, but it's going to be cool. Like, I think that's awesome. I think that's pretty cool. But of course, the ship they have is also a ship full of incompetent people. But the reality and the reason why they need this ship, because a lot of you guys are probably asking, if they can hold their breath for a really long time, why don't they just fly there? Because the journey is very, very long, and that it would take longer for them to fly there, and they may not be able to hold their breath long enough. They might be able to come across a couple planets here and there, but the reality is the universe is a big place, and the amount of knowledge it would take for a person to know exactly where they need to stop and to be able to chart that effectively based on their abilities is quite large, right? The amount of time it would be kind of insane. And so it's actually easier for them to basically just kind of stow aboard a ship or to use a ship that was given to them by the coalition and just kind of go forward from there. The problem is that in the middle of all this, while they're basically flying, it's wham, right? It's like a red alert and everything starts popping off, right? And then like literally like some targets coming in like super fast, right? Like it's fast, like I've never seen anything this fast before. Break for impact and like the ship just explodes, right? Just gets smashed to pieces. The bridge of the ship initiates this automatic sequence, right? Where it just like detaches from the rest of the ship itself. So the bridge basically kind of goes flying through space, but they're like, what in the hell just happened? And it's like, I don't know, man, but like whatever it was, it hit us and the ship just basically broke apart. Now, Mark's dad is back there, right? Nolan's back there, and the fear is that Nolan's died. The reality is that as soon as Mark gets out there and starts looking around, you've got Conquest and you got a couple other Viltrumites with him, and the Viltrumite war has officially begun. But the real question you have to ask here is that where Mark is getting ready to fight this guy, what happens to Conquest when Nolan gets his hands on him? Because I'm gonna tell you right now, what Mark did is nothing compared to what this poor bastard's about to go through. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.